In the early years of the 20th century, Europe appeared to be enjoying an age of prosperity and progress. Great cities expanded rapidly, industries flourished, and scientific discoveries transformed everyday life. Railways connected countries, electricity illuminated homes, and new inventions promised a brighter future. Yet beneath this peaceful appearance, Europe was becoming increasingly dangerous. The continent was divided into powerful nations that competed fiercely for wealth, colonies, military strength, and political influence. Every major country believed it had to become stronger than its rivals. Two powerful alliances dominated Europe. The first was the Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. The second was the Triple Entente, made up of Britain, France, and Russia. These alliances were originally designed to prevent war. Instead, they created a situation where a conflict involving one nation could quickly spread across the continent. At the same time, nationalism was growing stronger. People became deeply proud of their countries and believed their nation deserved greater power than others. In regions like the Balkans, many ethnic groups wanted independence from large empires, especially Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. This created constant political tension. Another major factor was militarism. European governments spent enormous amounts of money building powerful armies and modern navies. Germany and Britain competed to construct the world's largest battleships. Every country believed that being prepared for war would protect them. Ironically, these military preparations made war much more likely. By 1914, Europe had become a powder keg waiting for a single spark. That spark came on June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, traveled to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. During his visit, a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip assassinated Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie. The shooting lasted only a few seconds. But its consequences would change the world forever. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for supporting the assassins and issued an extremely strict ultimatum demanding complete cooperation. Serbia accepted most of the demands but rejected a few conditions that threatened its sovereignty. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Because of the alliance system, events escalated with incredible speed. Russia mobilized its army to defend Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia. Soon afterward, Germany declared war on France. Following a long-prepared military strategy known as the Schlieffen Plan, Germany invaded neutral Belgium to attack France quickly. Britain had guaranteed Belgium's neutrality. When German troops crossed the Belgian border, Britain declared war on Germany. Within only a few days, what had begun as a regional conflict became a massive European war. Millions of soldiers were called to serve. Most people believed the war would be over before Christmas. Almost everyone was wrong. The conflict that followed would become one of the deadliest wars in human history. When the war began in the summer of 1914, millions of young men marched off to battle believing they would return home within a few months. Crowds gathered in city squares to cheer the soldiers, convinced that victory would come quickly. But as the first battles unfolded, those hopes disappeared. Germany launched its invasion of France through Belgium, following the Schlieffen Plan. The goal was simple: defeat France before Russia could fully mobilize its massive army in the east. German forces advanced rapidly, capturing towns and villages as they moved closer to Paris. However, in early September 1914, French and British forces stopped the German advance at the First Battle of the Marne. This battle changed the course of the war. Germany failed to capture Paris, and both sides began digging long defensive trenches to protect their soldiers. These trenches soon stretched for hundreds of miles, from the North Sea to the border of Switzerland. Thus began one of the most terrifying forms of warfare in history: trench warfare. Life inside the trenches was miserable. Soldiers lived in narrow ditches filled with mud, water, and rats. Heavy rain often flooded the trenches, forcing men to stand in freezing water for days. Many suffered from a painful condition known as trench foot, caused by wet and infected feet. The smell was unbearable. Dead bodies sometimes lay only a short distance away because it was too dangerous to recover them. Flies spread disease, while huge rats fed on food supplies and human remains. Lice covered the soldiers' uniforms, causing constant itching and illness. Food was often poor, consisting of canned meat, hard biscuits, and weak tea or coffee. Clean drinking water was limited, and fresh vegetables were rare. Sleep was almost impossible. At any moment, enemy artillery shells could explode nearby. Snipers watched for any movement above the trench, making even a quick glance over the edge extremely dangerous. Between the opposing trench lines lay a deadly area known as no man's land. This open ground was covered with shell craters, broken trees, barbed wire, and the bodies of fallen soldiers. Crossing it usually meant facing machine gun fire, artillery bombardments, and almost certain death. Despite these terrible conditions, military leaders repeatedly ordered large assaults. Thousands of soldiers climbed out of their trenches and charged toward enemy positions. Most never reached their targets. Machine guns could fire hundreds of rounds every minute, cutting down entire waves of advancing troops. Artillery shells exploded continuously, turning the battlefield into a landscape of mud and destruction. The war also introduced terrifying new weapons. In 1915, poison gas was used on a large scale for the first time. Clouds of chlorine gas drifted across the battlefield, burning soldiers' lungs and eyes. Later, even more deadly gases, such as mustard gas, caused severe burns, blindness, and long-term suffering. To protect themselves, soldiers began wearing gas masks, but fear of chemical attacks remained constant. Aircraft also entered the war. At first, airplanes were used mainly for reconnaissance, helping commanders observe enemy movements from the sky. Soon, pilots began fighting each other in dramatic aerial battles known as dogfights, while bombers attacked military targets behind enemy lines. Another revolutionary weapon appeared in 1916, the tank. The first tanks were slow, noisy, and often broke down, but they could cross trenches, crush barbed wire, and provide protection against machine gun fire. Although imperfect, they marked the beginning of a new era in modern warfare. Meanwhile, the fighting spread far beyond Europe. Battles took place in Africa, the Middle East, and across the world's oceans. Colonies from the British Empire, France, and other nations sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers to fight, turning the conflict into a truly global war. By the end of 1915, it had become clear that World War I would not end quickly. Instead, it was becoming a long, brutal struggle that would claim millions of lives and forever change the course of history. By 1916, World War I had become a brutal war of attrition. Instead of trying to win with one decisive battle, both sides hoped to exhaust the enemy by forcing them to lose more soldiers, weapons, and supplies. It was a strategy that came at a terrible human cost. One of the most infamous battles of the war began on February 21, 1916. The German army launched a massive attack against the French fortress city of Verdun. Germany's plan was not only to capture the city but also to force France into a battle so costly that its army would collapse. For nearly 10 months, the fighting at Verdun never seemed to stop. Day and night, artillery shells rained down on soldiers. Entire forests disappeared under constant bombardment, and villages were reduced to piles of rubble. The battlefield became a sea of mud, smoke, and destruction. The French commander urged his men to stand firm with the famous words, "They shall not pass." The determination of the French soldiers prevented Germany from capturing Verdun, but the victory came at an enormous price. More than 700,000 soldiers from both sides were killed, wounded, or reported missing, making Verdun one of the bloodiest battles in history. While the battle at Verdun was still raging, the Allies launched another major offensive. On July 1, 1916, British and French forces attacked German positions along the River Somme in northern France. Military leaders believed that days of artillery bombardment had destroyed the German defenses. They were tragically mistaken. As thousands of British soldiers climbed out of their trenches and advanced across no man's land, German machine guns opened fire. In just the first day of the Battle of the Somme, the British Army suffered around 57,000 casualties, including more than 19,000 soldiers killed. It remains the deadliest day in British military history. The battle continued for nearly 5 months. During the Somme offensive, the world witnessed the first use of a revolutionary new weapon, the tank. These early tanks were slow and unreliable, but they could cross trenches, crush barbed wire, and shield soldiers from machine gun fire. Although they had little immediate impact, tanks would later become one of the most important weapons in modern warfare. By the end of 1916, both Verdun and the Somme had resulted in more than 2 million casualties combined. Yet despite these enormous losses, the front lines had barely moved. As the war dragged on, civilians also began to suffer. Food shortages spread across Europe. Factories shifted from producing consumer goods to making weapons and ammunition. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, replacing men who had gone to the front. They worked in factories, hospitals, farms, and transportation, proving essential to the war effort. Meanwhile, the conflict expanded at sea. Germany relied heavily on submarines, known as U-boats, to cut off supplies reaching Britain. German submarines attacked both military and civilian ships, hoping to starve Britain into surrender. One of the most controversial incidents occurred in 1915, when the British passenger ship RMS Lusitania was sunk by a German U-boat. Nearly 1,200 people lost their lives, including 128 American citizens. The sinking shocked the world and greatly increased anger toward Germany in the United States. For a time, America remained neutral. However, in early 1917, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, attacking ships without warning. At the same time, British intelligence intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany secretly proposed an alliance with Mexico against the United States. These events changed American public opinion. On April 6, 1917, the United States officially declared war on Germany. The arrival of fresh American troops, along with vast industrial resources, gave the Allies renewed strength at a critical moment. At nearly the same time, another dramatic event reshaped the war. Russia was facing severe economic hardship, food shortages, and political unrest. In 1917, two revolutions overthrew the Russian government. Later that year, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power. Believing that Russia needed peace more than continued fighting, Lenin negotiated with Germany. In March 1918, Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, officially withdrawing from World War I. Germany could now move hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the Eastern Front to the Western Front for one final attempt to win the war before American forces arrived in overwhelming numbers. The final chapter of World War I was about to begin. By the beginning of 1918, Germany knew that time was running out. Although Russia had withdrawn from the war, giving Germany the opportunity to move hundreds of thousands of soldiers to the Western Front, another powerful enemy was arriving. Every month, more American troops landed in France, bringing fresh manpower, modern equipment, and renewed hope to the Allied forces. German commanders understood that if they were to win the war, they had to act immediately. In March 1918, Germany launched a massive series of attacks known as the Spring Offensive. It was the largest offensive on the Western Front since the war had begun. At first, the attacks were highly successful. German troops broke through several Allied defensive lines and advanced farther than they had in years. Once again, Paris appeared to be in danger. But Germany faced a serious problem. Its soldiers were exhausted after years of fighting. Supplies of food, ammunition, and fuel were running dangerously low. Reinforcements were limited, while the Allies continued to grow stronger with the arrival of American forces. By the summer of 1918, the momentum had shifted. The Allies launched a powerful counteroffensive known as the 100 Days Offensive. British, French, American, Canadian, Australian, and other Allied troops attacked together using improved coordination between infantry, tanks, artillery, and aircraft. This modern style of warfare overwhelmed the exhausted German army. German forces were pushed back across France and Belgium. Many soldiers realized that victory was no longer possible, and morale collapsed. Meanwhile, conditions inside Germany became desperate. The British naval blockade had caused severe shortages of food and essential supplies. Millions of civilians struggled with hunger, disease, and economic hardship. Workers went on strike, protests spread across the country, and public confidence in the government disappeared. In late October 1918, sailors in the German Navy refused orders to launch what they believed would be a suicidal final battle. Their mutiny quickly inspired demonstrations throughout Germany. Within days, the German Empire began to fall apart. On November 9, 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated the throne and fled into exile in the Netherlands. A new German government immediately sought peace. Early in the morning on November 11, 1918, representatives of Germany and the Allies met inside a railway carriage in the Campagne forest in France. At exactly 11 a.m., the armistice came into effect. After more than 4 years of fighting, the guns finally fell silent. Across Europe, church bells rang, crowds filled the streets, and millions celebrated the end of one of the deadliest conflicts humanity had ever experienced. However, peace did not erase the suffering. Entire towns had been destroyed. Millions of families had lost fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands. Countless soldiers returned home with permanent physical injuries or emotional trauma that would remain with them for the rest of their lives. In 1919, the victorious Allies met in Paris to negotiate the peace settlement. The result was the Treaty of Versailles. Under the treaty, Germany was required to accept responsibility for the war, surrender territory, reduce the size of its military, and pay enormous financial reparations. Many Germans viewed these terms as deeply unfair and humiliating. The resentment created by the Treaty of Versailles would later contribute to the rise of political extremism, including Adolf Hitler, eventually leading to the outbreak of World War II just 20 years later. The human cost of World War I was almost unimaginable. More than 70 million military personnel were mobilized. Around 10 million soldiers lost their lives. An estimated 7 million civilians also died because of fighting, famine, disease, and occupation. More than 20 million people were wounded, many suffering lifelong disabilities. World War I also transformed warfare forever. Machine guns, tanks, aircraft, submarines, poison gas, and modern artillery demonstrated how industrial technology could make war more destructive than ever before. The conflict also changed society. Women proved their importance. In factories, hospitals, transportation, and agriculture, accelerating movements for greater rights and voting opportunities in many countries. Empires that had dominated Europe for centuries, including the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires, collapsed, giving birth to new nations and reshaping the political map of Europe and the Middle East. Even today, more than a century later, the lessons of World War I continue to remind humanity of the devastating consequences of nationalism, militarism, and diplomatic failure. It remains one of history's greatest tragedies, a conflict that began with a single assassination but grew into a global catastrophe that changed the world forever. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this historical documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into history.